Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
One of the doors open. Ready. Good morning. I guess good lunch. There's nothing like competing with a panel on TikTok. I wish we had those brains that we could take it both in at the same time while eating lunch. Thank you for being here. I'm really excited to have this conversation. It's so very important. So, as you know, it is Friday at 12 noon on Friday, April 12th. It is important that we let you know our land acknowledgement here at CU. The University of Colorado's flagship university honors and recognizing the many contributions of Indigenous people in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native nations. Their forced removal from these from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought Indigenous people, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with Indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We recognize, and how we do this is, we're recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, faculty, and their work, in educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating Indigenous knowledge, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with the tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support, and then recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. So I say this to that. Today we're speaking on Fashion Forward, the global fashion industry's future, and how will the business of fashion change in the face of ethical and sustainable concerns. So with us today, we have, and I'm going to start down here, Asher J. Asher J, National Geographic explorer turned tech entrepreneur, is the founder of Henocene.
Nailed it.
Say it?
You nailed it.
I did. Yes. Yay. A consumer-facing impact campaign application for brands to deliver on their corporate social responsibility initiatives and empowering citizen action for well-known brands like AB InBev, thank you, Prada, Adidas, as we like to say, Citizen Watches, L'Oreal, John Deere, and others. Jay advises corporations and multinational companies on how they can best model their strategies, outreach, and operations after nature. She is on the expert council of Open ESG, a decentralized autonomous organization, DAO, with fellow world leaders in impact sector associated with the World Economic Forum, on the advisory boards of Plastic Pollution Coalition and Legado,
Legato.
and on the boards of Wildlife Direct and One Green Thing. I don't think she's on her couch eating bonbons. I think she's a little too busy for that. So why don't you
Kick it off?
kick it off?
Okay, wicked. So I actually come from a background in fashion. I studied fashion at Parsons, and my father was in the textile industry. So when he passed, when I was in my early 20s, I had to take over his company. And I think at that point, going to the factory outlets in China and in India, Bangladesh, seeing it in person, and coming from sort of my inherent sense of alignment with nature and human well-being, it was directly at odds with it. And I could instantly perceive it. So it was shocking to me that my dad was funding that and participating in that, and that was the legacy I'd inherited. It was completely at odds with who I was. And I realized that, you know, everything was optional and a way to navigate a loophole for a for-profit outfit, right? Which was the company I was handed over. So we benefited out of legislation not being in place, regulations not being in place. So I was very quick to like get away from that because not lining your effluent tanks results in groundwater leaching. And all it took was me going with one of our employees in the factory. I went with him to his house for lunch, which I don't think most managing directors or CEOs actually go and spend time with an employee that may not be further up the pipeline, because there's such like centralized authority and such a lack of osmosis and connection and communication across an organization, especially when it's at a corporate level. And I went to his house in the village, and I could see him talking to me about how they came from an agricultural background. And literally 2 years after our factory had been in that place, he could no longer see, you know, the children in that area being able to go outside and play because they could develop breathing issues. And like the water discharge that was occurring in that area was affecting water health, right? And so they had to like filter everything, double boil everything to be able to drink potable water within their households. And I was like, in what conscience can I continue perpetuating that paradigm, right? So I immediately like left it, much to the chagrin of my family. And then I started looking at how could I be involved in the fashion sector, and I started doing more work around the recycle economy at that point, which was very nascent, where we were creating garments out of whatever waste fabric was being generated by other households on 7th Avenue in New York. And I realized that there's a massive disconnect between what we thought we were doing good, and it was sort of good around it. It was sort of based on the fact that we didn't have enough knowledge. So what we thought we were doing poorly was just we were resulting in some waste, and we should find ways to accommodate that waste. But come a couple of years down the line, you think about the entire life cycle of that garment, from the moment you buy it all the way to the time you dispose of it. Every single time you wash it, is it shedding microfibers into the water cycle? How are you capturing those microfibers? If not, it's ending up in the local streams and in the oceans. So everything has compounding consequences, and therefore your buying decisions have to be informed. If you're buying natural fibers, then are you ensuring that they're coming from ethically sourced areas where it's not draining resources in that landscape, such as water, such as soil quality? Is it monoculture at scale, or is it actually being done sustainably? So I think it's a matter of, as a consumer, do we even have the information we need? Is it being provided by the fashion companies you're buying from to truly make an informed decision? So that's one side of it, which brings in the whole need for systemic frameworks through which you can evaluate fashion companies before you make a consumer choice. But from the fashion side of things, there's been a lot of evolution in this space, right? Because fashion can't be defined as one big label. You have fast fashion, which is completely unsustainable and has no future as far as I'm concerned, and should not have any future, because the turnarounds are ridiculous and it results in a culture of obsolescence, whether or not the companies want to admit to it. It is entirely profit-driven and not oriented around any mechanisms of sustainability, because sustainability cannot act at that pace. So we should be honest about admitting to that. In terms of luxury fashion, again, the only reason they have the status that they've achieved, yes, there is definitely the allure of design. I come from a design background. I value beautifully designed things. I can see where there is a seduction around it. But is it worth the price point you're buying it at? For instance, one of the companies I worked with, Prada, all of their line up until even now is made out of virgin petrochemicals. They only fabricate in nylon. They're making a commitment now to move to 3% of their line towards repurposed nylon, which means they're extruding it from carpets, from offices that have been stripped, or from ghost nets that are in the ocean that they're fishing out. But all of these things is still resulting in a fiber, a yarn, that is going to shed more microplastics into not just your ambient environment, mind you, what you wear, you're breathing, but it's also shedding it into every ecosystem based on how you're showing up in those places. You know, everywhere you sit, you're shedding microplastics. Every time you wash it, you're shedding microplastics. So I think being conscious of like why you buy what you buy, but also being mindful of what a brand's getting away with just because they can at a price point because of status and social assignment of that status based on exclusivity, which is curated, right? It's not exclusivity because they only produce X amount because they're being ethical and sustainable. If they produce excess inventory, they actually burn it to keep it in demand, which is, again, a waste of all the resources that went into producing it to begin with. So I highly advocate for slow fashion, intentionally produced with artisan communities, empowering artisan communities in producing it. Those are the brands that we're working with because it directly empowers those that are in the production process, in the realization of the garment. It is very intimately connected to how it gets made and who gets to wear it. It's all about a privilege of being connected. And that is often eclipsed because you can't discern the sourcing, you can't discern the supply chain of fast fashion. And I would say rise above the myth of recycled, reclaimed garments, because not all recycling, not all reusing of garments is healthy either. Because I know a lot of fashion brands claim that they're sustainable and they are reusing fabrics and fibers that have been discarded, including H&M's eco-conscious line, which is rubbish, because it actually sheds more microplastics into like the world than if it were just allowed to be one and done, right? So we're exacerbating the problem, making it happen at a nano scale that is harder to intercept than if we had not refabricated a fiber that was already denuded and denuding into a fashion garment that we continue to wear. So is it actually environmental? Is it actually ethical? Is it actually eco-conscious? Having said that, there's good recycling efforts and viable alternatives that you can pursue, like Snow Milk is an awesome brand I would recommend. They actually work with thrift stores, collect high-end garments, and then just silk screen it. But again, life cycle of the garment, what prints are they using, what dyes are they using? So just thinking through it as a consumer, as a brand, before you produce is critical to being sustainable.
And with that, we have quite a few questions, like how do we navigate this? So we'll get to that, like how do you know you're making good choices? So now I want to introduce Lucy Lawrence. And Lucy is an entrepreneur, investor, and champion of digital evolutions. She is the founder of Double L Racing, digital architect for USAID Surges, and a former executive for eBay and GSI Commerce. Lucy has more than 30 years of experience in retail and commerce. Before 2016, she led thought leadership and innovation for eBay, bringing global retailers and development teams across eBay to design new commerce playbooks. She joined eBay as a part of an acquisition of GSI Commerce, and then the leader enterprise e-commerce operations with clients including Toys R Us, Ralph Lauren, and all sports leagues, NFL, NHL, NBL, and NBA. She was part founder of the Ashford, is it common?
Ashford.com.
Oh, that's just a typo.
Yeah.
Interesting, okay.
Can I jump in? Because you're going backwards, and I'd rather go forwards. Is that okay if I jump in?
Go for it.
So I have a similar background in that my family and the strength of my family came from agriculture, and today I am going back to the land in a very different format, but I feel I'm coming full circle. I am a MIS, Management Information Systems degree, and I fell into retail. So for those of you who are questioning yourselves as to what to do when you graduate, there are many paths that you can take with the degree that you go into. And I went into retail, mass retail, boutique retail, and luxury retail. And for me, it was the transaction of how to get a customer, to engage them and convert them, that drove me for the first 15 years of my career, not realizing what the product or the consumerism that I was driving. So I am guilty and I confess to it. In that process, I was invited by some MBA colleagues to start Ashford.com, at the time, the first luxury e-tailer in the US. We were called e-tailers before e-commerce was a word, and had the opportunity to take the company public, also get ourselves delisted when the bubble burst in technology. And were acquired by GSI Commerce, which today some of you may know as Fanatics, the largest operator on licensed goods globally. Went on to build with them the back end of e-commerce, which is a mirror to the front end. So I come from the operational side of what fashion lived off of, but in retail, across all aspects of retail. So from building fulfillment centers to agencies to, before we had social media, e-commerce was only driven by Google. So that evolution, and then that business was acquired by eBay, as Robin confirmed or stated. And in that period, I realized that retailers were fearing what was happening, what was coming from digital products. But at the same time, I realized that not only at eBay.com, but within all the clients that sit at eBay, we no longer have an issue of production in products and hard goods, and I'll double click into fashion because this is the segment that we're addressing, but we have an issue of distribution. So that changed my thesis, and it happened to be with my exit from eBay, and I decided to then start investing, joining boards of companies that were making an impact in the distribution of goods. So today, my investment thesis is that I seed liquidity with the opportunity to harvest opportunity. I seed liquidity to harvest opportunity. And with that said, I am playing today in the next segment of where Asher has been playing, which is in the distribution of products. So I sit on the board of the today largest operator of pre-loved goods, marketplace of resale. What used to be resale, you can call it pre-loved. We focus exclusively, or initially, in luxury goods because you have authentication of the product and you have a resale value. And then we moved into well-made products because there are some products, some brands which may not be labeled luxury, but they do have a long-standing pattern, long-standing cycle for the product. And from there, I went into investing in brands such as Loli in the Sky, which is all vegan products, Maca in Yacampot, which are two brands that are working with artisans in Mexico to build products that are staple categories. So not necessarily fashion, but your everyday wears. So I'm coming back for a circle into that. I went from, I got into circularity, into pre-loved, going into the consciousness, but in all phases, I'm trying to create opportunity on the redistribution of the product. So I'm not particularly looking at brand new product. I'm looking at the recycling as well as on the few of the fashion brands, one of them being Yacampot, the one. We are today taking bed sheets from hotels. The hospitality industry is one of the biggest industries in Mexico. So we get donations from hotels in bed sheets, and we are making apparel today from that. So we are not having to recreate fabrics. We are recycling the fabric. So that's.
Are you going to tell them that's what you're wearing?
I am.
Yes?
Yes.
She's wearing a bed sheet.
So if I fall asleep, don't blame me. No, I'm kidding. I can roll right into bed from here.
Lastly, I'm so fortunate to have a dear friend come from Mexico City to be with us. and I'm wearing her fashion. This is all embroidered by a village of women, and it's highly well made, and I believe it's hemp.
No, this is linen.
This is linen.
This is hemp.
Yeah, and that's, here is another one of hers. She is very stylish. This is hemp, beautiful embroidery that she's taught these women. I'll let her talk for herself from there, but I can't not brag on her. So Laura is the CEO of Amori Rosas in Mexico City. So in 2016, Laura co-founded Amori Rosas while still in graduate school at Yale. Amori Rosas is an ethical fashion company committed to empowering indigenous artisans in the state of Chiapas in Mexico by paying a living wage for their embroidered work while keeping sustainability in mind. Laura runs the company from Mexico City, where she manufactures and commercializes at 2 of the brand's locations in concept stores in North America. Laura holds a bachelor's degree in marketing from Monterrey Institute de Tec. It's Tec de Monterrey. Tec de Monterrey. An MBA from ISADE. IGADE. Oh, gee, yeah, thank you. School of Business, and a master's in advanced management from Yale School of Management. She has lived in Italy, Canada, and the United States. Her area of expertise are local entrepreneurship, fashion, marketing, and retailing. If you ever go to Mexico City, look her up. She knows everything. She'll show you a wonderful time.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. Well, I think in my case, I started marketing and I worked for 4 years doing that, and I didn't like it. I was okay. This whole idea of just working at a company, it's all about just making money for someone. So I had a hard time finding motivation, waking up and going to work. Also, the decisions and just like implementing or following orders sometimes would conflicted with my values. So I was like, I think I need to do something else. I tried this, but this is not my call. So I decided to go back to school. I heard about social entrepreneurship, and I was like, okay, this sounds like something I may be interested in. So then I was like studying a lot of business models and trying to get inspiration on what should I be doing with my time, with my skills, and then I had to set up a goal. So the goal I said back then is like, it has to be something easy. So then I decided that if I could, with my time, make the life of one person better, then my life would have a sense. And that's how it all started. I wanted to work with a group, but I didn't know what to do. I was determined to do something good, but I had no idea. And then you had all of this decision process, and you're analyzing. I was like, okay, females, what can I do? And then it's so cliche. So I just ended up founding an ethical fashion brand that empowers women that already hold the skill sets of hand embroidery, which is something cultural. And the way I contribute is that I use design to add value. If you go to Mexico City or Mexico and you find a market, you'll see that each single stand repeats itself. So then if you are a smart customer, you are going to start bargaining and try to get the best price. And that's how the artisans end up with no money, because they just they want to sell. They are so desperate. They have no differentiators, so they just sell whatever at a very low price. And that's the situation, and that's the place where we are stuck with crank traps all over the world. So the whole idea with the brand is that if you incorporate design and you create things that are unique and modern, then you can just make a product that's way more value. and you charge the right price for it, and you redistribute the income throughout the supply chain. So that's what I have been doing for the past 7 years. It all sounded so beautiful at the beginning, but it's so challenging. I was telling Lucy that I got so into the operations and just like making this business sustainable, that I just feel that I've been like working a lot in operations, and sometimes you lose like your vision, and you stop thinking about the bigger picture. But after all, I think somehow the brand is successful. I think someone asked me before on Tuesday what's a moment of excellence with my brand. And I think a moment of excellence is when I'm walking in Mexico City and then I'm behind someone wearing one of my pieces. And then I rush into the person and I compliment. And I'm like, oh, beautiful jacket. And the person, it's like all pumped. I had gotten like weird answers, but always good. Like one time I was like dancing at a nightclub and there's this guy like super good looking wearing one of my shirts, and I'm like, wow, you look so good with that shirt. And he's like, thank you, it's my favorite one. I'm like, oh my God. And then I told him, I made it. And he's like, really? I have one question for you. How many have you made? I'm like, I don't know, maybe like 50. And he's like, well, you know, this piece defines me so much that sometimes I'm scared that I'm going to run into someone wearing the same shirt.
Oh.
And that's when you realize that it's also important to have unique pieces, and that's like luxury. Luxury is to have something that you feel so identified with. And you know, it was a nice finding or something. It's a piece that brings you back to a moment in your life where you were happy, or you had like just like this unique time.
I'm going to ask you a couple questions real quick. How many villages are you employing women?
Yeah, so this is how we are at the moment. So we are building a business that's integrated. So we have a studio where we produce everything, and we cut everything there, and then we send the pieces to Chiapas and Hidalgo, and we're working with 2 communities there. Then everything comes back to Mexico City, we assemble the pieces, and we sell them at 2 points of sales that we own, and also another 11 stores. So we work with 45 women. I stopped bringing in more people into the company because I'm more interested into increasing the average income per person than just working with a lot of people and offering a little, like, a small income. So also, because this whole idea of like putting together an ethical brand is so complicated, I don't want to mess up with a lot of people. So until I know my model is proven and it's good, and I'm doing good social impact, I won't bring in more people into it. So that's what I've been working on. And also I've been thinking about how can I increase my impact, because with working with artisans, it's hard to scale up. So that's one of the problems. So if I'm capable of pulling up a model and a method that's proven, and I can share that with other entrepreneurs that want to start their brands, then I think that can be a broader impact for me.
So Laura had shared that most of these women are in agriculture, and that's a way to feed their village or barter for something else. But to teach them a trade is very important. And you also are now working, because I saw your interview, on financial literacy. You call it in Mexico financial equity?
Yeah, like
Inclusion.
Financial inclusion, that's correct. And then also building their leadership skills.
Yeah, so it's just interesting to go to the communities and understand how they are organized and their dynamics, and to not mess with that. Like, you want to help, but also so what we offer is an additional income, because they also have land, so, and they are also mothers, and during a day they do different tasks. So one of the things we do is that they work doing hand embroidery for the hours they are available, and that way we don't mess or like, yeah, we don't change their day-to-day activities. And things that have been happening that are interesting is that in rainy season, males also are doing hand embroidery. Yeah, and then during the pandemic, as I said, it's additional income. Well, the world shut down, but then we started making face masks, and our additional income became the only income. So that really helped just like strengthen the relationship, because the artisans know that no matter what happens, we are always going to be working together, and we'll find a way to continue like working and like creating beautiful things. And that moment, although it was a complicated time, we never stopped working. It helped the brand a lot because we went from having like 1 or 2 online orders to 300 orders a month, and we were selling a lot of face masks. So it's just like, for me, it was just like a very beautiful message or experience about how even in the worst situation, you can find a way to have some positivity.
And Lucy, you had mentioned that often in villages when women are working on something solely, when it's payday, the men show up.
Yes, so traditionally, two things. A factor that has impacted, and I'm speaking only on the artisan market today in Mexico. That's where my experience is. So you might have different market experiences. Yes, most of the males have come and emigrated to other markets and are sending money home. So the women are managing their lands and on a part-time basis, or in some cases, depending on the generations, they are doing the artisan work. So we started working through one of our groups, and we went out, and when we went to do their payday to, hand over based on the production, they bring us their telares and their stitching, all the men would show up, and the women would stay very quiet. And we realized that they were coming in to receive the men that were there for the village. Let me be clear, because not every household has the men, because they are away working in other markets. So we realized that there was a financial control over them based on their production. So in a creative way, we invited several artisans to take a trip to come with us to museums to see patterns and history on design. And in that process, we invited them to be able to open smaller savings accounts. So we would still go into the village in the next trip and pay the base rate, but then we would give them their incentives based on increased production directly to them, and that way they started having savings accounts. Some of them asked us to put the money directly into the schools and pay the school tuition for their kids instead of putting them into those accounts. So that part of the financial literacy and financial inclusion was interesting. Another piece to compliment you on the men, a lot of you will buy product that has the little pom-poms. Mm-hmm. Most of those pom-poms are made by men. And it's discarded product that it's left over from the threads, and while the men see the women earning a living from the artisan work, and they may not have the stitching qualities or the stitching training, they figured out to make the pom-poms. Nice. So most of the pom-poms you see or they're attached is the male artisans helping out the family and trying to be all part of this creative phase.
So I'm going to have...
Robin, could I add to what you were saying?
Yes.
So when we were talking about women being empowered, there's a brand that we're working with right now that we're going to launch a campaign for. So essentially in certain markets like India, Colombia, we have women who are acid burn victims. It's a byproduct of domestic violence where somebody actually disfigures the woman in the household and takes away her very sense of self, right? By throwing acid on her. And so they have incredibly awful, long-lasting burns to heal from, which requires expensive surgeries and a series of surgeries. Like one woman had to undergo 50 surgeries and she's still nowhere close to being healed. And that requires extensive skin banking and skin cell being grown, tissue being grown. And so this particular brand that I encountered in Milan, they were showing at Fashion Week, and of all the brands, I was like, this is brilliant. So they're showing the collection, and they have won the social award for the last 4 years. And they are entirely fabricating it from these acid burn victims. So not only has this woman, Kulsum, who's the founder of this entity, taken on these women, but what she's trying to spearhead is she's like this page 6 celebrity debutante in India, and she's really well known, has a massive following, and she's like, I'm sick of people writing articles about me just because of my name and who I am. And so she's like, I'm going to use the stage to give these women an opportunity for remuneration and give them a chance to be seen. And it's amazing how much space she holds for them. So she basically has enabled this brand called Aura Lumiere. And all of the money that this fashion brand earns goes to the foundation that invests into skin banking. So then they pay for the next generation of women who are rescued to undergo surgeries. And so it becomes a circular loop of financial independence and also autonomy, agency, but most importantly, the capacity to reclaim your sense of self, receive awards in Milan during Fashion Week, despite having everything taken from you, and not even having your family stand by you when you've been disfigured by the man who was supposed to be part of your family, right, who you trusted your life with. So it's an incredible betrayal from which they're recovering. But what we're bringing into the space is that we are running a campaign with a photographer in New York who's worked in fashion, and he's created this AI algorithm that allows him to sift through multiple portraits and overlap portraits together without having a photographer's bias come into it. And so the campaign we're running is around raising additional funding for Aura Lumiere's women, but whatever images other women who have endured instances of domestic violence submit to the campaign will then be fabricated into textiles, result in interpretive collaborations with the Aura Lumiere women who are also, so it creates an upliftment and a sense of community around having endured something, having reclaimed yourself from that, and now where are you at? What scars are you wearing, which is a sign of healing that shows that you've moved forward and reclaimed your life. And I don't think there are enough stories in society where women speak their truth, and it's coming purely from women without having to go through conduits that are patriarchal, that reframe that dialogue, right? So I think instead of bringing the male involvement in this conversation at all, it's happening entirely through women, and it's coming through an AI algorithm into the output, which I think is wonderful. But I think there are a lot of interesting fashion initiatives like this. The other company we worked with is called Lemondia, and they fabricate their sneakers with artisan women around the world. They do each collection as a capsule collection based on empowering a specific artisanal community in a specific region. So they'll have the Thai collection, the Guatemala collection, but they're empowering indigenous textiles, and they're producing these sneakers in extremely small batches. So the other aspect that our platform has decided to cater to is, can products be market validated, market created, so that we don't have to produce something and have wasted inventory because no one's interested in it. Rather, let's solicit that feedback early on in the production process so that you can inform where it is you're even acquiring your raw materials from and who it is you're producing it with. So right now we're running a feedback poll, so you can go on hennessy.com and you can actually vote on sneakers and see which sneakers you'd like produced. And it was entirely created, the designs on each of those sneakers was created by emerging artists from around the world. So it also empowers new talent to be seen. So the whole thing of being inclusive is such an important part, and it's not inclusive or circular in just supply chain, just sourcing, but looking at financial circularity. Every aspect has to be inclusive. Everything should be coming from the stakeholder lens. If not, you're doing it just in one area and the other areas are continuing to pilfer. So I think the more mindful a brand is, the more you'll see them enlist all of their stakeholders in every tier of their process of coming into being.
Thank you for that. So we want to make sure, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I want you to have, you can write us questions. We have someone in the back with postcards and pencils. But I think for all of us, it's very confusing. What do we do with all this information? So I want us to briefly touch on everything we're talking about, what it means quickly. So when you hear us talking about upsourcing, circular, you have a quick definition of what that means. And then we can get into how do you find this? How do you do this? So if you could give us a brief description on circular, on fast fashion, on sustainability, upcycling, artisan communities, ethical communities. And then we're going to go into sourcing, why, and supply chain, repurposing. So
I can kick it off. So
Okay.
I'll take circularity on. We've been on a linear model all this while, which is take, make, waste. Like everything else, we start with something and we don't think about what happens to it after it's out of sight, out of mind. And that can start from the vendors who are creating the gray goods. They don't care about what happens to their cotton or their wool or their nylon or whatever it is that they produce as a fiber that then enters the market and goes further down the stream, right? And the further up the pipeline it goes, the more disconnected the source vendor is from the end product, the more divorced the supply chain is from the end product. So then it's like, by the time it has been fabricated, like once the yarn has been spun, once it's been dyed, once it's been like given the twist it requires in order to have the sheen that it has, every one of these things can take you further away from where it originally came from. And we want to reduce that gap, or at least have systematic evaluation of that entire process, so everyone who's coming into that pipeline knows when they're stepping in, when they're stepping off, and what happens to that item next. So that when we go back and say, something is wrong with this product, or this has to change, we know exactly where we need to go back in that pipeline to fix that solution set from a source level perspective. I think right now there's no real systematic documentation in especially larger corporations, but it's coming to be the norm, with blockchain being the possibility that they can adopt, right? So almost all supply chains are now on blockchains because they want to have a database that can streamline where things are coming from and how they move, how they're changing hands as they come into final fabrication phase with the end brand. And then in terms of the circular economy, the way you enter circularity and out of this linear model is that you don't produce waste. So everything that you start with already accommodates and accounts for what is likely to be the byproduct at every stage, and how can that be assimilated into making an alternative good. Or you're aligning partnerships that will utilize that which is a byproduct into their sourcing, right? So then it becomes part of their sourcing supply chain. And I think some companies do it effectively, but again, we have to be mindful, because the more you mix gray goods together that are from different fiber sources, the harder it becomes to separate them at a later point and repurpose them, and the more likely it becomes for them to shed or behave in ways that are continuing to be toxic to both human health, but also to like any of the environments and ecosystems and landfills they enter. And I will say, like, I don't know if you guys know the toxicology reports around like what we wear and the environments we live in, like upholstery, fabrications of like all the furniture in your household, curtains. Every time you come into textiles that are synthetically produced, especially for household, most of which in the American market has to be treated with flame retardant, you're coming into contact with an excessive amount of flame retardant. So the average human being that's giving birth to a child these days, the child is born with 250,000 chemicals in its bloodstream, right, at minimum. So like, if you really work with, I welcome you to look up Shaw Institute, Merry Research. They work prolifically with just looking at toxicology reports across the board based on how we've treated the environment and how we've come up with commodities that continue to poison our own bloodstream. So are we making wise decisions for our own well-being over protracted periods of time, or are we going to continue to be surprised by the fact that we're ailing from diseases that we're completely self-perpetrating?
Yeah,
right?
Lucy, I'm curious to ask you something
So
about this.
I'm at the baby steps of that.
Yeah, because let me
research.
ask you this too. I think you are most qualified to answer this. So when I worked in healthy living publications, that was the time that we were coming up with the organic label that you would see on the fruit you bought, the food you bought. Do we have something coming down the pike that's going to help us have some type of label or some story? Because how do we navigate this?
There are efforts in the market today, and you'll see them from where the company is certified as a B Corp, or where you have a, trying to think in English what the word is, negocio justo, just fair trade. Thank you.
Fair trade, okay.
Specifically on the product, there are, I'm going to say, conversations and tracks being laid as it relates to the production and the traceability of a product, as you were saying, with blockchain. We're not there yet, I'll be honest. And it's going to take a significant investment from the people who are manufacturing, and it's going to take a significant change of consumption and usage from us as consumers. Because are we looking for it? Are we not looking for it? You know, and while there is good strides being made under ESG, environmental, social, and governance, there is also a lot of noise, which I talked about the other day, and you touched on greenwashing, which some companies will tell you, yes, this is this. But really today, we don't have the tools at a international level, because most product is moving across borders. So, you know, I think the first efforts are going to be made by creators like Laura and her team, or some of the artists, or some of the groups that I work with, or some of the teams that you're working with, where it's going to come from the smaller ones, where you will be able to see that. But in the larger market, in the mass-produced products today, I think efforts are going to be made. I think the next generations are going to ask for it. I don't think there's enough investment or development being made in that. I will tie that into where you were touching on circularity, the effort where I was talking about resale and pre-loved. That's the baby step into understanding where the product, so the product's already made, and as she was saying, when you are recycling or upcycling the product into being fabricated again into another good, well, the baby step is, we already have this product, what can you do with it? Talking specifically in fashion, the pandemic helped certify that fashion became an asset class. And something many of you may not know is, at the beginning of the pandemic, and I will say the year 2020 to 2021, resale of fashion had a huge boom. The biggest boom we've had in probably the last, what year are we, 24? In the last 18 years. Because people started seeing, hey, I have something of value in my closet. And can I turn that into somebody else's value, one. And then two, people who were used to going out to a retail space couldn't do it, so you start shopping online. And we saw it in a emerging market, which is Mexico, and then when I talked to the US market, they were seeing the exact same thing. So all of a sudden, you know, where some of us in college learned to buy from Buffalo Exchange and from Goodwill, today it's becoming much more of a standard practice. I will say, in the resale market, you have some new best friends. Your shoe cobbler, your seamstresses, your dry cleaners, they can rejuvenate products for you, and you will be surprised where you can find new buyers for your goods. So that's the baby step of the effect of what a full circular production of fashion could be.
And yeah, I would say, adding to the certifications, there are so many of them out there, but there's also the likelihood where those who do the bare minimum can qualify for that label and then almost dilute the value and significance of that label. So I think standards and benchmarks need to have either grades or degrees within it, so that you can be more clear on knowing, yes, this is fair trade, but this is like a orange level fair trade versus this is a green level fair trade, you know. And I think there needs to be greater qualification of what it means to be fair trade, because it can be used in so many ways, and when you're in the industry you see a very different take, because people benefit from it. They can mark up the dollar value of the garment if they qualify for those labels. But if you're doing the wrong thing, qualified under the base needs, and then you get into the door and therefore can mark up your value, you're going to continue utilizing that loophole to push your product for a higher price point. And you don't deserve that margin, you know, because you're not actually doing the right thing. So I think there has to be better ways of qualifying and quantifying information in the space, for sure.
So it's not there yet, but we're going to get there.
We're working on it.
And did you want to?
Yeah, I can add something. Yeah, so when we were starting, I was like, okay, I'm going to source the best products, the most sustainable fabrics. And then we started just like coming up with the minimum viable product, is it? Yeah. And so then we are creating all of these things, and then you hear there's this leather made out of pineapple from the Philippines. That's amazing. And then there's hemp, and then tencel, and all of these other materials. And then I'm in Mexico, and I'm like, okay, how am I going to bring them here? So I'm lucky that my husband does supply chain, so he's like, okay, I'll help you. So then they're finally there, we make the samples, and then it's time for me to cost them. And then I realized the price point was so high. I was like, okay, who is going to buy this? Like, it's such a beautiful product. And it has hand embroidery and the best sustainable material I could find. And now it's coming together, but then the price point is $1,000. And then
Can you also explain what the retailer takes from you?
yeah, the retailers, they take 50% of the retail price, right? So then that also increases the price a lot. That's why new brands now, they own their stores. So then I was, okay, maybe I need to start by just like using a lot of hand embroidery, because I think it's more important for my brand to do social impact than environmental impact at the moment, because the options aren't there yet. So I hope at some point they are going to be more accessible. It's also all the certifications, it's also business. So it's just a stamp you put on things, and when you really understand what's the stamp for, you are like, okay, well, this is questionable. So it's just like a lot of questions and a lot of variables, and still you want to create the business, do good, and move forward. So there are a few things along the way you have to sacrifice. So then instead, I was, okay, then I think I'm going to concentrate the things I can control, and that's how I manufacture my goods. And that's how I ended up with a studio that takes all of my time and effort, but I think I finally learned that business. So what we do is that what's one of the biggest problems of the fashion industry, that you try to forecast what's going to be the demand a year ahead or maybe 2 years before. So the person trying to do this forecast just maximizes. And then the quantities that aren't sold, you just discount them, and you have all these channels that are for the unsold goods, and the companies, they try to recover their cost. So I was like, okay, maybe what I can do is, if I own the studio and I control my manufacturer, then I don't have MOQs, and I just can produce whatever I have, and I'm flexible with that. So what I've been doing is that when I design a new piece, because it's fashion and you cannot sell the same piece forever, you need to be innovative also. So that's another complexity to the business. We design collections, and now we have like a good baseline of the styles that are successful, and we add new ones that we're testing out, and we only made 20 pieces of them. If the style sells super fast, then I need to hurry up and make more soon. But if it's selling slow, it may just be because the price point is high and it's going to sell, and just like I tell the customers, take this piece if you really like it, because you won't see it ever again. And you'll have one of the 20 pieces that we made. So you just play with all of those variables. But if you have a very strict business education, you'll see that all of those complexities and decisions aren't like good for a business. Because then you need to come up with a business model that's like easy and simple to execute, so you can maximize your profits.
We have a few questions from the audience, and I believe some of them.
Robin, can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
My student ambassador is here in the room, and I happen to have his laptop by me, and I think he has to go to class. Do you need to get a note? Okay. He was running around helping me and his other guest, and I could see him, and I was worried he needed it.
I think we've answered some of these. Is it possible to move to a time when our clothes are made and sold locally with local materials? And one thing, and I would also say, being sensitive to how our world has become so complex, having children trying to work, just a lot in there, and how you have clothing purchased by how they embroidery. Like they produce for you, you pay them per item so they can raise their children, is so fantastic. But do we feel like we've covered that question?
I would just qualify and say that, like, yes, we can definitely do anything with consumer demand. Like, we have such a strong voice with our wallets, and I think if you ask for it by making more concerted purchases in brands that are local, then that's going to be the trend that we talk about at the next industry conference, and that informs how brands show up. So we do have the bottom up, but there is top-down too. So yes, then these kind of conversations and these kind of questions, I will take it to the next brand conference I'm at and be like, this is something people are speculating, right? So I think it is a top-down, bottom-up approach, and these conversations should be happening frequently.
Have you heard about Unspun?
I have not.
No.
Unspun, if I can read the writing, is a circular wearing machine so clothes do not have seams. Is that
Who sent the question? Can you tell us?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a circular weaving machine, and so you weave your clothes instead of sewing them as pieces of material, right? So then there are no seams in the fabrics when they're finished. And so if you didn't sell a piece, for example, you can unspin it again, and you can just retrieve your
And
yarn.
create a new
Ah.
piece.
And so it's a way of addressing some of these questions that I think
Oh, that's so interesting you brought that up, because there is a designer who did a fashion show just recently. I forget his name, but I'll put it up on my Instagram later today. And he did a fashion statement that was of people wearing woven clothes but having circular knits on top of that. And the garment was undone by the time he got to the front of the runway. Yeah, that was brilliantly done. But there's ways in
so
which
cool.
people are waking up to the industry and within the industry and asking the same questions. So I do love that that's becoming the forefront of critical thinking at present.
And also regarding the previous question, there's a movement in California, in San Francisco area, that's called Fiber Shed. So it's a group of people that are like working together, and like one of them are like bringing back the crops that were original, and then some of them are doing the dyeing, and some of them the weaving, and the final is just like piecing together the garment. And it sounds like an amazing movement, because they also want to make them compostable.
So it's local.
It's local.
Yeah, so that answers that
And
question.
let me add one piece to the prior one. That's fantastic on Unspun. Thank you, because I will research it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
circular
Exactly.
knitting. Yeah.
To the prior question that someone had about local and being locally produced, yes. So I think we can definitely make that a major movement. I think as we are all coming out of this hibernation that we were into, and we're coming back out to understand our communities, and we want to invest and rebuild our communities, we can do that. But also the effect of social media, which I have a love-hate relationship with. You can create something, and today it is quite simple, versus what it was 10 years ago, for you to publish images of the pieces you create, the pieces you design, and you can ship internationally. Because now the platforms are also giving you that infrastructure to reach a global buyer. So you can innovate and create locally, but still have an international audience. So I do think that that is an even greater opportunity for those that are looking to, can I create locally? Of course you can, and now you actually have eyeballs all over the world. So.
And I would say, like, in terms, since we're focused on the future of fashion, the one thing that we should be thinking about is when we see movies about the future, about fashion, what are people wearing, right? We're pretty much in like same thing. Everyone's wearing the same thing. So this notion of individuality being a priority in a time when resources that are global commodities are becoming scarce is never highlighted. when it's dystopian future, everybody is pretty much in uniform, right? You're a number, you become one of many. And because that collective is what is needed, because we're together addressing a bigger problem of resource scarcity. And so I think we have to also understand how we are coming upon fashion and why we opt into it within our own lives, but also why do companies put it out there? You know, how far are you exercising your individuality and need to distinguish yourself, and how far is that tethered to the footprint of the garment you're wearing? For instance, certain colors will not be viable at all. They're only viable if you opt for synthetic dyes. So you might have a slightly more boring, earthy closet, and would you be okay with that? Would certain prints, certain patterns be something that we're willing to forego? And so how much are we willing to give up of what we feel will emulate our best selves through what we wear in wanting to establish who we are? And that itself would have to become a point of questioning for brands. And that means the competitive moats reduce, because more brands will start looking alike, because we're all trying to create something that is sustainable, truly.
And we do have something on that. We have 10 minutes. I have a few questions. What about people that fake sustainability? That was a question.
You touched on that with greenwashing.
What do you do about that?
Yeah. I think,
And they're
I mean, with
stealing
Shein,
also
for
your
instance,
artwork.
we held them accountable. Like, I think there's public outrage against Shein, right? So that's a fast fashion company out of China, and they were trying to get away with sustainability claims that were completely categorically untrue. H&M eco-conscious line was called out. The beauty of the times we live in is that there are a lot of third-party independent audit mechanisms in place, and there are a lot of agencies willing to call people out, and they are thorough in their investigations and post their reports up publicly, and it is taken into consideration by brands at brand conferences. It is unfortunate that like the brand industry conferences are not publicly visible to consumers, because you don't understand that, like, yes, corporations are taking your concerns into consideration before going into the next cycle of manufacturing. The other side of it, I'd say, is also in terms of what informs like a brand from existing or not existing is literally whether you buy into it. And if we say, no, we're not giving you the money, then there's no way it exists. So the cancel culture threat is something brands respond to immediately, because it affects their bottom line literally overnight, which we've seen happen repeatedly across the board. Like they lose market value, share value, the instant they lose consumer trust. Like literally share value depreciates by 14% when consumers lose faith in a brand, which is a huge hit to a brand. So
And
speak
then
out.
also, I mean, I think you're right. Like our message is to be strong consumers with our voice. We saw that happen with Nike and their materials. Yeah. We saw that with Benetton, with Gap. And so us mobilizing seems to be very important to this process.
Yeah.
There's a student question, and we would have to end on it unless there's something that you all really think is important to say. This is a tough one because it could take some time. It's just how are you able to go from marketing to fashion? How did you gain that knowledge? How could you take that path that you took? What advice, if any, do you have for a student who wants to do this?
Yeah, well, as Lucy said, there are many things you can do with a degree. And like after all, when you're working, it's about just being able to solve a problem. So, and teach yourself. Like there are so many things that won't be taught at school. And when you're trying to work, you'll see that you probably don't know how to do it. And just surrounding yourself by the right people and being humble enough to say, I don't know, how can I do it? And then find experts and tell them what you're trying to do. You always find people that are willing to help. So the way I did it is that I knew what I wanted to do, and I hired 3 people to start the company. And they were experts in making clothes, and I was expert in selling things. So that's how it all started.
I would say also, like, if you have genuine passion for something, it's very hard not to back it up with conviction, because you really, that's all that consumes you all day long. And there is no other you. There's only you, right? One of you. and you're inimitable. Like your life experiences, every single thing that's come to make you who you are, makes you indispensable. So whatever you create, no one else can really fill that particular aspect of that creation. So there is something truly powerful that can emerge from you when you realize who you are. So I think, like, step into your power, step into yourself, and discern what it is that you care relentlessly about. Because I don't even sleep sometimes, and I don't care, you know? I give up so much of so many things, but it doesn't feel like giving up to me, because all those things are not as essential to my soul and my sense of fulfillment and being as what I get to do every day and how many people I get to do it with. And so I think you can definitely hop around as much as you please, because you're you, and everything you've assimilated makes you uniquely qualified to provide only that which you can. So lean into that.
Lucy? We have one.
I will say that you are more powerful than you think right now by having a marketing degree. And granted, I have no marketing degree, and I've been able to work with individuals and create and marketing. Where it comes in is once something is created, how do you get eyeballs and hands on it? In fashion, I think most people who maybe, like the person who asked the question coming out of a career, see the sexy part of it, the models and the fashion shows and the finished product. There is a whole road that came to that finished product and that one image. And if you want to, I will tell you that there are dinosaurs fearing their extinction in the back end of fashion, where it is from the apparel makers, the sourcing companies, the companies providing the back end systems, which is the supply chain systems, the inventory systems. All those companies are trying to adapt and survive to what's happening today. So don't look just at the front end and the finished product. Look at the companies that are across the supply chain of fashion, if you're wanting to stay in fashion. And then the other thing is, look at artisan creative products like Laura's and like some of the ones that we have in the different markets. And come talk to us. We have small productions, and we are trying to maximize those productions, and we will probably, if you are somebody who has an entrepreneurial spirit in the marketing area, we will more than likely say, hey, here, run with it and see what you can create. And on the other side, you might want to go to a large company or a seasoned company where you can learn the structure. So it depends on what mindset you're trying to do, but don't just focus on the front end and just on the images and the Instagram and the transaction. Look at everything that came to it. We need to better storytell, and today marketing has the great power to help with that in all aspects of the transaction.
That's correct. I'm going to have you all each do a thumb up or a thumb down to something. I think I'm a better consumer after this, and I'm going to expose myself and see if I have to reevaluate this. So I do not buy clothes. They waste water. When I see that they're giving everyone living wage, that will help me. So I rent my clothes through Rent the Runway. As simple as my jeans. And they come to my front door in a recycled bag. I wear them. I put them back in that recycled bag. They pick them up at my front door. I spend $200 for 8 pieces a month. I can hold on to them longer. My value in clothes is $52,000 for the last year and a half. I feel really good about this, but then when I hear that the clothing that I'm wearing may have carcinogens or something that isn't good, all of a sudden I'm like, God, I thought I was doing such a good job. So we don't have time to talk, we're at timing, but give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
I don't think it's that simple. So it's like, I would say
Neutral. Neutral.
I would say just choose well,
Okay,
choose
of
well
those brands.
within rental, yeah.
Yes.
I'd give you a thumbs up. You're trying. You're not, my thing right now is not producing anymore, and it's all about distribution. You're driving the distribution. We're distributing the product. So
Okay.
And urge
It's a
Rent the
good-
Runway
it's a
to
very
use
good
renewable
step.
technology, like to have renewable vehicles.
Yeah, and you're right. I can't choose which designers I'm using in that.
Yeah.
And Laura, anything?
Thumbs
Yeah.
up or down?
You're gonna neutral.
Well, that's how it is, right? We are in a process, we're learning, but I think the starting point is to question and to have questions, to start thinking: was this a good decision, a bad decision? Am I going to repeat this? And just change our habits, because I do think as a consumers we do have the power to vote with our purchases, so that's how we can really change. Like in Mexico, there's this thing happening right now. It's called Temu, and it's just a Chinese company, and people are.
It's all over the place.
I know, and like people are like, I got this on Temu for $5. I'm like, that thing shouldn't be $5 if it's if it's good. And people are just buying a lot of things that they don't need, and then they think arrive and it's crap. And what do you do with that?
But I would say one thing with the Rent the Runway or any of that, right? I stopped renting because I can't support brands like hers. So if there's something truly emergent that is supporting indigenous community, then it's better to buy 1 or 2 garments a year and really look at who you're supporting and where you're buying from than to even rent. Because yes, it's a far more sustainable way to do things, but you know, it is supporting emerging brands that are already struggling, trying to find foothold within a highly competitive market.
And employing people.
Yeah.
So you said you spent 52,000?
No, the
how much?
value of the
The value,
clothes I've worn is $52,000. They
Okay.
tell you that, and I pay $200 a month. So
Okay.
I'm spending $2,000, but the value of the clothes over the year is $50,000.
So maybe try to cut it down to 1,000 and take those other 1,000 and help seed some of the
Oh,
artists
that's a cool idea.
and become an investor.
Yeah, that's a really great idea.
Yeah, well,
Thank you all, and I hope you all feel smarter.